So I want to welcome Brad and Gary, who are foster parents of ours who live in Utah County, and Kylie, who is a foster mom that lives in Salt Lake County. Thanks to Kylie's wife for supporting her and being here tonight, and to all of your guys' kiddos that are also doing whatever they're doing to make it possible for you to be with us tonight. We really appreciate that. And thank you to Amy Boyack, also with Utah Foster Care, who is our co-host, and to Amanda Walker, also from Utah Foster Care, who will be helping us moderate and make sure we don't miss any questions that come in. So I'd like to start the evening with Brad and his husband, Gary, introducing themselves. I sent them some questions ahead of time, so I'm going to turn some time over to them to talk.
Want to hear us okay?
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Brad and this is Gary. We've been together. I started working for Utah Foster in August, and that's when I started getting more information about Utah Foster Care and the process, because I really didn't know very much about it, but a better idea of what Utah Foster Care does, and as far as the recruitment and education retention departments, and just kind of get a better feel for that. And so that kind of sparked my interest. I never had any biological kids of my own. In a prior marriage, Gary, he has 6 kids that he's already raised. So he's done the whole kid thing. But we thought it'd be a good way for both of us to still be help be a good mentor for the need to be. So that's kind of our background. And we'll get more into kind of specifics if people have questions about that later on too. But currently, we kind of have a unique situation. Right when we finished getting licensed and doing all of our training, we found out that 2 of Gary's grandkids were still in the system. So the state really pushes for related placements, and so we have them currently in our home, and it's definitely given us a lot more respect.
Great, thank you so much, and we're so grateful to have you here. And like you said, we'll get to more questions later that I know you will be able to help answer. So Kylie, if you'll introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Kylie. My wife is working right now, so she's not here, but her name is Ada. And we've been fostering for 2.5 years, 2 years-ish, a little more than 2 years. And we have had 3 placements, 2 our sibling set and 1 separate placement that was an individual. And we've adopted the 2 sibling sets, or not 2 sibling sets, but 2 girls that were a sibling set, if that makes sense. We kind of decided a long time ago, we've been together for a lot of years, since we were teenagers, and we decided kind of a long time ago that it was something that we wanted to do because, you know, as everybody knows, it's very difficult for us to have kids on our own. There's a lot of other things that go into that, and we knew it wasn't going to be easy regardless of how we did it, and there was going to be a lot of work involved. And so we kind of decided that one of the main things we wanted to do was to adopt of some sort. And the more we kind of researched it and looked into it and saw the real need for kids to have a home and to be fostered and things and to be taken care of in the system, the more we came to terms with the fact that we wanted to adopt from foster care. And so very shortly after we got married, like 3 days, I think, after we got married, because we had been together for 8 years before we got married, we called Utah Foster Care, and somebody was at our house, probably within 5 days of getting married, and we set up all the stuff we wanted to do. We started our training and everything, and we decided to just go for it because we already knew a long time ago that that's what we had wanted to do. And a few months later, we were licensed, and we were taking in kids within a couple days, and it just kind of all went from there. My kids are coming up, so you'll hear them. Yeah, so we just kind of always knew that we wanted to do something because we wanted to have kids anyway, and that just seemed like the best way of helping the community and of having our own kids eventually. And so, you know, that's just kind of how we fell into it, and we just always wanted to.
Thank you, Kylie. And I've met her daughters. They're adorable. They're so good. And they came to another event. They were so well behaved. I love it. Okay, here are some questions that we already had sent in. So let's go through those and then we'll answer any other questions everyone has. The first one, and I'd love to hear answers from both families. What does it mean being an LGBTQ parent in Utah? That was the question. What does it mean to you to be an LGBTQ parent specifically in Utah?
You want me to go first or Brad? Okay. So I think you're muted, by the way, Tammy.
Okay, now I'm unmuted again.
Repeat the question. Sorry, my kids were talking to me, so repeat the question.
Yes, so what does it mean for you to be an LGBTQ foster parent in Utah?
Okay, so I guess for me, when we first started this, we had a lot of fear or just concern, I guess not fear, but concern because of the communities and stuff that we're in. We weren't quite sure how it was all going to work and how everything in the world was going to take it. And, it was always what we thought was a valid concern that maybe it wasn't going to be accepted or that we were going to run into a lot of people that were questioning or concerned that we weren't the best options, But quickly we learned that we were actually very warmly welcomed because there's such an extreme need for families like ours who have 2 men or 2 women for various reasons. There's a great need for people for kids who need 2 parents, but also may or may not need, a male role model or a female role model more than the other. And so we were actually very warmly embraced when we went through training and we went through licensing. And even when we met our first families, our first biological families that we worked with, we were actually very warmly welcomed and we were very surprised. So I think to us, it was kind of an eye-opener to not only the need for our type of families, but also the willingness for the community to embrace and accept all areas that are needed and all families that are needed.
Thank you for giving us that insight. It's so great to hear that from you and that you've been warmly accepted because definitely you are needed in that experience that you bring. So Brad and Gary, how would you answer that?
For us, we were kind of talking about this yesterday. I mean, initially we didn't really necessarily feel like we were any different from any other foster parents to say, but we also were kind of nervous too. We weren't sure how common it was for same-sex, couples to be foster parents, and so we went into that. But we were surprised to find out that in all the classes we were in, there was, multiple sets of couples that were usually in those classes or even individuals. So it wasn't that uncommon that we found out as going through the process. But what else would you add?
Well, I agree with that. The sound check is our audio coming through okay now, or is it still
glitchy still?
Glitchy. It's okay.
Right.
So I'd like to first of all train those who us, the presenters and the experts in the foster care program. Good for anyone, and I would that any parent couple, whether they're same-sex or not, if they went through that, I think they would learn so much about how some of not. So that's kind of an aside, but yeah, we were very well accepted in classes.
And it's always good to help educate the community, kind of, and couples that there's all that kind of stuff too.
Great, thank you. I know I think it's still a little choppy. If you guys want to try it on your phone, maybe one of you pull up your phone and try that too. We were hearing significant parts of it, but and also if that's not going to work, maybe even type in the side because I don't want to miss any of this great answers that you guys have for that. So thank you for sharing that. I have found when I've gone to trainings, because in our positions in Utah foster care, we can jump in and go to trainings, and I always see a lot of same-sex couples there. I'm so grateful for that and that they're there. So the next question that we had was, have you had any unfortunate or difficult experiences being a member of the LGBT community, being in the system? And it doesn't sound like anybody has, but if you have, would you be willing to share those and maybe how you overcame them?
Yeah, so I can share ours, I guess. We haven't really had any that I would consider uncomfortable or severe or anything like that. But I think the biggest difficulties we've had with being a same-sex couple was mostly just trying to get the kids set up for things, because as a foster parent, a lot of the things you have to do is get new doctors set up and go to a million different doctors, but set up school and try to get all these type of things filled out. And one of the hardest things as far that we ran into was that a lot of people it took them time to understand that we were both mom, and that we were both needing to be on the paperwork, because oftentimes, especially where we had two women with two little girls, they often thought that one was mom for one girl and one was mom for the other girl, and they were like, okay, well, who's who? And we're like, no, we're all together. And I think that was the biggest struggle that we ever had, was just that you go to these different offices and stuff like that, and you have to kind of remind them that we're both their parents. I'm mom one, she's mom two, or whatever. And then I think as far as like meeting any biological family or meeting kids or anything, we never had problems with kids. The kids were just like, oh, okay, that's fine. And with the biological families and stuff, oftentimes they just asked us and we're like, oh, you're both parents? Okay. And they kind of just, we never had anybody care really, except for they would just ask us, if we were married or whatever, but we've never really had anything beyond that so far.
I'm really glad to hear that. And it's interesting too to hear, maybe sometimes it's just a matter of clarification, right? Of just saying, we're married, we're a couple, we're both moms. And I think sometimes people just don't know. They're not meaning to be offensive, but they just don't know for sure. And
that's what it ended up being, is just we kind of, even now after they're adopted, we're still in a routine of places that we don't go on a regular basis. We automatically say, we're moms, I'm mom, she's mom, where do we need to do whatever. And so they would just kind of know, and it just kind of became habit.
Great, thank you. I don't know, Brad, are you on another way to answer that for us? If not, we'll come back to you when you jump back on somehow.
Can you hear me through the phone? Oh, okay. And is that a lot better?
Yeah.
Okay. You might have to repeat the question again. Sorry.
No problem. The question was, have you had any unfortunate or uncomfortable experiences as a same-sex couple coming into this process? And if so, how did you handle them?
We have not had any. We got licensed I think it was the middle of February, right? And then we've had the kids for about a month now, but we've been, like they suggest in trainings, we talked to our neighbors before we got the kids. We're kind of out in the country, so we don't have a whole bunch of them, but we told them all that we were going to be having kids, and we didn't get any negative feedback or anything from that, and they just said, well, that's great. Yeah, we don't have like a specific example to go off of, but it's all been positive so far.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that.
Okay, so I have one. This is Gary. So the the negative experience is to be in isolation with our two boys and have the world suffering from a pandemic around us. So I think that's the only thing. So I'll turn this back to Brad.
But
Thank
of
you,
course,
Gary.
as being LGBTQ people, we know how to handle that just fine.
See, it's a superpower, right? You have a superpower in that area of knowing how to do that.
Exactly.
Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so how do you talk about, or what is a conversation with your foster kiddos or adoptive kiddos look like regarding being a same-sex couple? Have you had conversations with them about it? Have they had questions, and how have you handled that?
With our girls, our first placement that we ever had was just one little girl, and she was only 11 months old, so we didn't ever have that conversation with her. Our two girls, they're now 4 and 5, and it's kind of just become an ongoing conversation, because both of them, for their situation, came from a heterosexual couple and primarily lived with a male figure. And so it was definitely confusing, and it's still confusing sometimes for them because they're still so little, and they see the people around them who have moms and dads or moms or whatever, combination. and they occasionally will ask, where's my dad, or where's this or that, or why don't we have a dad or something, and we've just kind of made it an ongoing thing. One, we're honest with them. We tell them who their dad was and where he was, or their mom or whoever, and we talk about that on a regular basis if they ask us, and so that they always know. And two, we've kind of developed a method with books and with just, even not now, we can't socialize, but before we were socializing with other kinds of families, and trying to find, oddly enough, normally you would never say, I'm going to go find a family with two dads so that we can meet them. But that's kind of what we did, is searched out people within the foster community and with the outside community, and said, okay, this family has two dads, this family has mom and a dad, and whatever. And we kind of just showed them and said, look, everybody's different. These kids have two dads, kids have one dad or one mom or whatever. And in our own families, I don't know my dad, so we've kind of used those situations where every family's just different, and we just kind of have made that an open book conversation with them. As far as they ask, we're going to answer it, and it's led to some unique conversations that I didn't think I'd be answering yet, but it's been a lot better to be open and honest with them, and we've had a lot less, I think, hard conversations, because we've had so many easy conversations, if that makes any kind of sense. And it's just kind of been everybody's different situation, and we've tried to fill that imagery within their entire lives, and it seems to have made it a lot easier for them. And
Kylie, thank you for that answer. That is wonderful. Isn't that what we should all be doing, is showing children that there's diversity and variety in families, and that every family looks different? I love that you said that you just have open conversations and you make it okay for your children to ask any questions. I think that is just solid parenting all around to create diversity and acceptance. Thank you for that. Brad and Gary, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
Yeah, we're still learning that part too with these kids. So we have two boys. One is 8 and one is 13. The 8-year-old, when he first came in, he asked for my bedroom list. And I said, oh, it's just right here. Well, he said, wasn't that Grandpa's bedroom? And I said, yeah, we have a big bed, so we just share it. So I wasn't really sure the best way to respond to that. But anyway, and the funny thing is, before we got them, in the support group meetings that we went to, the caseworker and also the guardian ad litem, which is the attorney for the kids, they went in and explained to the kids that, okay, yeah, Gary and Brad, they're a couple together, and, explain that. But I don't think it still didn't quite understand what that meant. So we just kind of take it as it comes when questions come up. We didn't really sit down with them and try to explain anything.
But that's great, because you can approach their questions with answers as they need it and as they're ready for it.
mm-hmm.
Right? That as they process one set of information, then they're ready for the next, and you're giving them the information. Thank you. Those are both great answers. So one more question that we already have, and then we'll go to new questions. What is the most valuable advice you could have been given when you started fostering? When you started this process? You could go back, what would be the most valuable advice you would give?
The most valuable advice I wish I would have had was that you need to be open to whatever's going to happen, and just accept it long before it happens. Because no matter what people say, and people will say a lot of things, no matter their position, you never know what's going to happen, and you can't set yourself for anything, good or bad. You have to just kind of be willing to live and let things happen as they're going, whether they are good or bad, or whether it goes to adoption and lifelong, family, or if it goes that they go home or somewhere in between, or anything else that might happen. You kind of have to just prepare yourself for that, because a lot of people will tell you that they know what's going to happen, and nobody knows what's going to happen. Something I like to tell other people that are new is just to remember that these kids are not, they're not going to be your picture perfect view of what you thought you might have. Um, just like any child, they're going to have different needs. They're going to, especially if they're older, they may or may not like the same thing you like, or they might not act the way you always hoped your, you know, first child might act, or they might not think the way you think because they've had this whole past before you ever came into it. And so you have to remember that if you're going into this thinking that you're going to find this, amazing kid that's going to love you for everything that you are and be exactly how you ever wanted, um, you may think that to some degree because I love my girls. I wouldn't change them for anything. And, we're happier than ever exactly how we are, but it's definitely not what I thought it was going to be. And there's definitely a lot of things that have changed in my view of raising kids and of being kids and of what the kind of things that they have gone through and will go through still. And so I usually like to tell people that you have to kind of always be open to not only understanding where these kids are coming from and what they've been through, but also that they have a whole history and a life before they've gone through this, whether they're an hour or a day old or they're, 13 or 14 or 17 years old. They've had some sort of history long before us, and that's, their life is going to be, I don't know, that's going to be a part of their story, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I'm hearing you say is adaptability is important, right? That adapting and being willing to adapt to how the story unfolds is really important. And that it's also important to let go of certain expectations, that it's going to look exactly a certain way, that it's important to let it, as it evolves, change your expectations accordingly.
And be willing to love and accept everything that does happen, even if it is negative or it doesn't end up the way you were hoping it would end up, or the kids don't fit into that perfect box that we sometimes like to put our future in. Being willing and being able to be open to being happy with that outcome and being able to accept it, because that's so much easier in the long run to do these things. It makes the journey so much more fun and not so stressful, I guess.
Thank you. That's really wonderful advice. Okay, Brad and Gary, what would be your answer to that of what would be the most valuable advice you could have been given when you started this process?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me wasn't necessarily like information I wish I would have known, but it was more or less just now going through the process is understanding that for this current placement that we have, it wasn't until about after a month that we kind of got into a routine that kind of worked for everybody. I mean, the kids still have troubles kind of following things, but they at least know what to expect now. And so that was good to figure out that it's not going to be just like, oh, after a couple of days, things are going to move smoothly. The first week was definitely a transition for us. And then also some of the hardest things that I'm finding is kind of just the different cultures coming together. So what the kids were taught, in different homes, they've actually been in several placements up till now. But even with their biological family prior to that, I mean, they're always taught all these different things. And every house they go into, they're saying, well, no, these are our rules now, and they may be completely different from what they were used to before. So that's really hard for the kids to get used to. So that's probably the hardest thing. I don't know if there's necessarily, one perfect advice to be able to combat that, but it's just like they were saying, Kylie and Tammy, you're saying about being adaptable and not expecting perfection or anything like that. What would you add, Gary?
Well, I think I would also agree with Kylie and Tammy and Brad. One thing I noticed, for what it's worth, is, of course, Brad and I have been together and alone for several years. So when suddenly you have two very hyper boys come into your life, Of course, our life completely changed. We don't have the freedom and the mobility that we did have. Of course, we're in a pandemic right now, but still we recognize that a lot of our life has to revolve to a degree around them, around their needs, getting dinners and making sure they practice good hygiene. And right now we're having to help them through school every day, which is a tough job to do. But so it's the fact that you suddenly begin to share your life and your time with others, and so you have to give certain things up in order to get some other benefits and blessings. So anyway, just an observation.
Thank you. Those were amazing observations and insight from both of you, that I think it's going to take time for routines to be established, and being patient with that, right? And then just combining your life with other people is going to be challenging, and to keep your expectations based on the reason why you're doing it. The reason why you're doing it is to provide long-term stability for these kiddos, and that means you're willing to sacrifice for that, which I have to say, truly, in working with individuals who are on this journey and then having the privilege of meeting foster parents, I think it is one of your superpowers that you have, is that ability to set aside yourself and your needs and establish routines that help everybody in the household thrive, which is so much trickier when you are balancing, like you said, kids that come from different backgrounds and have had different experiences in their life. So thank you for that. So do we have any other questions anyone wants to ask or have asked on the Facebook page that we can answer? If you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. And then I see a question down on the side though. If I live with my girlfriend, do we have to get married in order to foster? And that is from Natalie. And yes, Natalie, in order to foster in the state of Utah, you do need to be married, not living together. So that's the answer to that one. And I see another one about what is it like caring for siblings? And both of our foster parents on here have done that. Kylie and Brad and Gary have sibling placements. So what's it like caring for siblings? How is it different?
So for me, or for us anyway, I should say, I think it comes with its own pros and cons in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of additional challenges. I mean, you go from, in our situation, we've never had kids before. And at the time we were only, 25 years old. So we were like, raising kids was nowhere near anything we knew how to do. And so all of a sudden getting our license, and then 2 days later we have 2 kids in our house. We had 1 kid at that time, but we eventually had 2 kids in our house. Was just kind of a mind-blowing experience. You didn't really know what to do. And I don't think, even if you've raised kids, I don't think you'll ever know what to do when you suddenly have more kids than you started with. But as far as challenges, you have multiple kids and they all have their own needs. In our kids' case, our girls' case, one of our girls has a few more medical needs than the other, and so she requires a lot more attention, and the other, which can be hard for our oldest because she doesn't get that same attention, and that's something you have to battle with. Just like any other sibling rivalry and stuff, they have those same things. But there's also some good things because they have each other. And so when mom needs a break and needs to go get the dishes done or something, they can both go play with each other rather than just play with mom. Me as an only child growing up, my mom was my only person to play with, and that was really difficult. And so to me, I think it would have sometimes been harder for us to only have one than it would be to have the siblings, because you always have to keep them entertained. Whereas most of the time, like they are right now, they're downstairs in our playroom entertaining each other, not me having to entertain them. And so, and not only that, but they also support each other. So when you have kids that come from really hard or really bad situation, they kind of act like each other's support system. They can be there for each other. They can help each other through a lot of the things that they're going through. And that's really quite a helpful thing to have.
Thank you, Kylie. Those are great answers to that, right? That siblings help each other. The sibling relationship is the longest relationship of our lives. And as Amy pointed out over in our comments there, over 2/3 of our kiddos come in a sibling group. So homes that are able to do that are very much needed. Let's let Brad and Gary answer that question. And then I've got some other ones that have come in. I've been writing them down here, and we'll go to those.
So what comes to mind is Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. So yeah, we have the good and the bad, but in the final end of the day, they really like being together, and it would be much different if they weren't, and it would be they do provide support to each other. Even in their conflicts, they still support each other. So I think it's a really good situation where you can have siblings together. And ours are 5 years apart, but that doesn't seem to affect the relationship. The younger one is actually the boss over the older one, and so it's kind of an interesting dynamic. But yeah, good to have siblings.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely need the support system because they go through so much being through the foster system, and just the history that they had to live through is, to get them put into the foster system. These kids go through a lot, so they definitely need any kind of support system they can have, and to have that consistency where they can go through it with a brother or a sister, that's definitely a huge perk for them.
Thank you so much. Those answers are right in line too with what we talk about in training, right? And when we look at the process of what helps kids the most with stability, sibling relationships are one of those things that really helps. We had a question, do we have a need for families willing to foster LGBTQ kiddos in Utah? And absolutely, yes, we do. In fact, that's a question we ask when we come meet with you in your home, is how comfortable would you be caring for a child who identifies as LGBTQ? And I can say from my experience in meeting with people that overwhelmingly the answer is yes. The majority of people are saying they're comfortable doing that and they're willing to do that. I think an amazing thing that LGBTQ foster parents have is they already have the skill set to know how to help these kids when they feel different and isolated. So that's a great question. And then, are there many single LGBTQ foster parents in Utah? Absolutely, there are. And single foster parents do a great job of building their community and having a good support system in order to foster as a single parent. And we love all and appreciate all of those. And then someone asked, can you still date? If you're single, can you still date as long as the person's not living with you? Yes, you can still date if you are a single foster parent. That is okay to do, and keeping in mind the kids and their needs and how it impacts them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, other questions?
I obviously don't have a question, but I have something to add to one of the other questions. As far as the need to foster LGBTQ kids, something I noticed over the years is our GAL for our girls, who was our GAL for our girls, we actually became really close friends with her throughout the case. And one of the things she always tried to convince us to do, or always tried to get us to do once we were to the adoption stage, was to take LGBT teenagers, because one of the things she told us is that jails work with a lot of kids. They have a big caseload, just like caseworkers. And one of the things that she constantly was telling us was that she has kids in her caseload, just like many other GALs, that are still waiting for somebody to take them, because one, it's hard for teenagers to get put into foster homes, and especially for adoptive homes, but it's also really hard for LGBTQ kids on top of that. And so then you have a lot of these kids that are really needed. So at least from what I saw, I don't know the statistics or anything, but from at least what I saw, there was a lot of kids, especially teenagers and middle school, that were really needing families to take them in and being able to help them go through the struggle that is figuring out your sexuality and all that kind of stuff and where you fit into the world. And I think a lot of the times when I meet new LGBT families, I always like to talk about this because a lot of times we already know what it's like to go through because we went through that whole thing. And these kids are just starting that journey. And on top of that, they have nowhere else to go. And, they may be in group homes or something like that because there's just not enough homes. And so a lot of the things that you might want to consider is the number of these kids that are just like us that do need somewhere to go and need a family to help them through that journey.
Thank you, Kylie. That's really good insight, right? That we do have kids out there, especially teens, that need homes, that can understand their unique situation. So someone asked, can you adopt if you're single? Absolutely. You can adopt if you are single. And here's a great question. If adoption was the goal, was there a reason you decided to foster first and not adopt a waiting child? That is a great question. Why did you go the foster to adopt route?
I mean, I've never gone through that because we only had 2 cases and one of them went home and the other are still with us. So, and we did decide to adopt them. But I know some families that are adopt only. And I think the situation is very individual to not only your family and your situation, but also to the kids. When you agree to do these things, no matter how much you want to help and how much you love the kids, you also have to do what's best for everyone. You have to be willing to commit to them forever because it's not there's no return policy. You can't just restart if things, if you're not happy how things are. And so you want to be able to know that this is what you want. And you should probably know that long before you go into an adopt situation. But that's things you consider from the get-go. But I know a lot of families that are adopt only because or a foster only because they either have 10 kids already. I know many foster families that have a lot of kids already, and they just can't take them, but they still want to help their community. They still want to help these kids, but they're not ready to. Or I know other families too that are just not ready to have a lifelong commitment. They're not ready to stop and say, okay, we're going to have a family for the rest of our lives, but we want to help. So we're going to help, but we're not going to, stay the forever route. We're going to help these kids try to return home. We're going to help their families, and we're going to support them so that they can go home and not have to stay with us. And that's actually a very noble thing to do in foster care because most people do want to adopt, and first and foremost, we need to be able to help their family so that adoption doesn't have to happen. And so if you're questioning whether or not you're ready to adopt, I would still very much consider going into foster care and just being a foster only because then you can take in these kids, you can be helping them out, and you can learn enough about them to understand where you really are and what you want to do because you can always be a help without having to commit for the rest of your life. There's always for that.
Am I unmuted still? Oh, yeah, I can hear me on the speaker. Okay. Yeah, just to add to that, I wanted to, some of the thoughts that gone through my head as going through the process is there is an ideal situation for the kids, but then there's also reality. And you have to come back to reality sometimes and say, okay, well, what makes the most sense? What am I capable of doing emotionally? What am I capable of doing, for these kids? So yeah, if people are wanting to get kind of their feet wet in foster care, there's also respite care, if people don't know about that, which is kind of doing kind of daycare for foster families. It gets your home license so you can watch those kids for them for like a day or even overnight, and that's a good way to help out too. But another thing too is whatever your reasons to go into it, just know that there's low pressure, no judgments. And we're all our worst critic. We can't let things kind of get in our head. We need to make sure we're doing things that are still logical, even though there's tons of emotions going on with foster care. So just make sure you're doing what you want to do, and don't feel like anybody's ever going to judge you or pressure you to do something that you're not ready to do.
Thank you. Yeah.
I really suggest I always suggest, because I've had many people ask me, even my own family members asking me about whether they should sign up, and be foster parents or adopt or anything. And I always tell them to call Utah Foster Care and have them come to your house, because that always seems like the most terrifying step. Because at least for me, when I felt like that, I felt like the second they come to my house, I'm tied in. But then they come to your house and you realize that they just want people to want to be there. They just want to help you. They understand that people want to start a family. They understand that people want to adopt. They understand that people are scared and that people may be questioning, what can I do? What can't I do? Will I be attached? Will I be attached? Will I do these? They understand that type of thing, and they'll sit with you as long as they need to, and they'll walk you through it, and they'll answer your questions. They'll understand and wholeheartedly help you and say, okay, if you're questioning this, let's just start slow. Let's just start here, and we'll try this and everything else. And they really are a huge help. So I always think that having that first visit with Utah Foster Care is always the best thing to do. Even if you end up deciding not to do it, at least do that, because I think they really will make you feel so much more comfortable.
I wanted to jump in there and just point out a note that I think is significant, partly in answer to a previous question, and that is that you do have to basically foster for 6 months before you could adopt children that you might have taken into your home. So that's another part answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
Am I okay to chime in here real quick? I was gonna answer a question that someone had asked about the difference between foster care and proctor care. I think it was Dennis. I go back to this. So it's all, I mean, even if you're a proctor parent, you're still providing care for kids in foster care. But the difference is if you become a state licensed foster parent, which is going through Utah Foster Care, you are directly licensed with the state as a foster parent. And they consider it kind of like the lowest level of care, if that makes sense. Kids with the least amount of behavioral needs and things like that. Proctor parents are licensed directly with the proctor agency. And so you're not a state licensed home, you're a proctor licensed home with that agency. And there are a few proctor agencies out there. And you're typically going to care for children that have some more behavioral and emotional needs. And so a child gets placed in a proctor home if they're not able to find a basic level foster placement, if that makes sense, through the state. Dennis, let me know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Amy, so much. Yeah, and as Tara just pointed out, proctor home studies are not adoptive home studies. They're different. So when you go through Utah Foster Care to become a licensed foster parent in the state of Utah, the home study that the licensor comes and does for you is a valid home study for adopting in Utah also. So there is a difference between those two types of home studies. Absolutely. And both Kylie and Brad pointed this out, but especially Kylie, really thank you for being cheerleaders for us as Utah Foster Care. We do love to come to your home and meet with you and visit with you. I've actually seen a couple people on here that I've been privileged enough to come to their home. And honestly, it's the best part of this job, and it is no pressure. We are not there to sell you on being foster parents. We're there to educate and answer questions and help you figure out what fits best in your life right now. And we're just grateful when people are willing to meet with us, and we're grateful for every step you're willing to take. Okay, so what other questions do we have?
Hey Tammy, it's Cody. How are you?
I'm good. It's so nice to see both of you. They are a great couple that I have gotten to meet with.
I do have a question because I'm hearing a lot about same-sex couples, and Connie's cisgendered and I am a trans man. Do you have any statistics on how many foster parents do identify that are not the LGBT, but more of the T or questioning or intersex or anything like that?
I don't have statistics. I don't know if anyone else on here with Utah Foster Care does have statistics. I don't know if we keep those statistics, right?
We don't necessarily have any statistics. I can tell you in the Salt Lake Valley, it's not a lot. Again, this is a pretty, I think Amy had posted that it's been pretty recent, that we've really had, you know, LGBTQ couples coming into foster care and being a part of foster care. We have a few though, but it's definitely a need, because I've seen a lot of kids in foster care who are identifying as trans, and that's something that they really need that support for. So I would say not very many, but it's definitely a need that we have.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for answering that. I'm going to check and see if that's my internet that is causing problems. But Cody, you guys need to finish your licensing so then I can say, I know. I know one of those couples that's doing this in this area.
And so I wanted to add something to that too. So I'm on the same thing. I don't really know. I've never met anybody in the trans community that is a foster parent personally. But I obviously haven't met everybody. So, but one of the things I've learned is that there's always a high need for every single situation and every single kind of family, no matter what it is or where you come from or what you look like. And there are kids that come in that are questioning whether they're intersex or they're trans, or they're in the process of, you know, going through that transition or trying to do any of the things that are involved in that. And so we have kids in the system that are going through these things. And if they're not families, then that just means there is even that much higher need for those kind of families. And so I like to look at it that way, is that the less there is, the more you're needed. So, you know, that's always a good way to look at it. If you're ever wondering, you know, if you're going to be the only one or not, I don't know, but you're definitely going to be needed no matter what.
Thank you, Kylie.
Yeah.
That is so well said. Yeah, absolutely. And then someone's asked a question over here, can you be a foster parent if you cannot drive? So technically, yes, it's going to be challenging because there is a lot of getting kiddos to and from places that they need to be. So our, the Office of Licensing is going to, when they come meet with you, they're going to have, what their question is going to be is, what's your plan? What is your plan to get these kiddos around without driving, and what resources do you have? So I would just recommend you figure out what those resources are, right? To say, okay, how would I do that, and how would I handle it, and have a solid plan in place. And then Amy answered that over in the side also for us too. Okay, other questions? These have all been great questions, and I think hopefully everyone feels like they're getting good answers to those questions that you've had. We planned on this being around an hour, and I don't want to cut it short. If there's anything else, let me just remind you that we have a Google questionnaire form, and we've attached that to the Facebook event page. We'd love for you to fill that out if you would like us to answer more questions for you. We are happy to call and email and answer your questions and come meet with you if you're ready for that step. And if you're not ready and you just have questions, that's okay also. But if you fill that form out, it helps us know what your questions are and how we can help you get those answered. Okay, someone asked, do you and your spouses both work full-time, and how does that work with getting kiddos to and from appointments? So Kylie.
So in our situation, I work full-time. My wife used to work 2 or 3 part-time jobs because she teaches dance. She's a dancer. And so she works a lot in the evening, different hours and things like that. Plus she was working during the day. However, she did have to, she's the primary mama in this house. So, you know, she's queen bee, but she had to kind of rearrange that. Luckily, because she had multiple small jobs, she was able to kind of rearrange that situation. Just because oftentimes you're going to have a lot of visits, or you're going to have court dates, and you're going to have family team meetings, and you're going to have school meetings and doctor's appointments and all these kind of things that you're going to have that are going to take a lot more time than most of the time you anticipate. And so, yes, it's 100% possible to work full-time jobs. Let's start there. It's absolutely possible. You just have to have a plan and be aware that that is going to look very different, and if you're going to be very busy, basically. You just have to plan on being very busy people. And me and my wife were homebodies all the time. We didn't really do much of anything. We kind of just hung out at home, and that's where we were all the time until we had kids. And now we never are home. We're always doing something, and we're all busy all the time. Even after adoption, we're always busy all the time. And that's just kind of something we've grown and adapted to, and that's just kind of part of it. But you absolutely can work. And even with all the things you have to do, 99% of the time, caseworkers and everybody else will involve you in planning visits and trying their best to work with everyone for times that work. They're not just gonna, be like, sorry, you have to be here in the middle of the day, whether you like it or not. They're going to say, what works for everybody. Let's try to make this work. So you always have a say and always are able to, work that into your lives.
Thank you for that answer. That really helped us get a good view of that. So what's it like for you, Brad and Gary?
So yeah, it's pretty similar. I mean, with the quarantine, obviously there's a lot of exceptions going on right now, but it's also kind of a blessing in disguise slightly that we're both home. So that kind of helps alleviate the stress dealing with, the kids, especially if they're throwing tantrums or that kind of thing. But yeah, my work's flexible, and Gary's is pretty flexible too. I guess that would be one perk to taking in older kids, making sure they're school age, because then if they're at school, that kind of helps with you getting your work done, and then you go back and pick them up and that kind of thing. And then also to reiterate what Kylie was saying about the support group that you have, caseworkers, if you personally aren't able to pick up the kid or take them to an appointment, I mean, at least the ones we've been working with, they're willing to do that or find someone with DCFS that would be able to come get the kids and take them to the appointments as well. So, I mean, there's other resources, like Kylie was saying, you're not just left on your own to figure things out. I mean, these are kids that currently the state owns, and so it's primarily their responsibility to help you figure things out.
Thank you. That's such a great answer, and I love hearing that. Those are the things that foster parents can answer better than any of us can, because you're there and you're doing it, so you know what that looks like in your lives. So Tara posted a link over on the side if you click on that for the Google form, and and Amy pointed out, we're meeting with you, and it looks just like this. So that's one way this pandemic has affected our work, is that a lot of things have moved to be virtual, but we're really available. So if you're ready to meet with us, we can meet with you virtually.
But we miss meeting with all of you in your houses.
Yes.
A little bit.
We have. I was meeting with someone this morning, and their cat crossed the screen, and we were talking about their cat, and I was like, oh, that is something I definitely miss about in your homes, is meeting your pets. So another question here, and thank you, Bree, for coming. She says she has to run to another meeting. Thank you for coming. Sarah asks, how has this current pandemic affected the foster care system? My quick answer to that, before I turn that over to our foster parents, would just be, it is an ongoing process of figuring out exactly what that looks like for foster parents. And I truly believe that the Department of Child and Family Services is doing their best and doing an excellent job to work with foster families and biological families and figure out how to navigate all of this. But Kylie and Brad and Gary, if you have anything to add, we'd love to hear.
So something that I know to be a hard thing for a lot of the people now is a lot of these kids really need outlets, because they've gone through a lot. They have a lot of things to process. They have a lot of things to understand. A lot of them are very active. My kids are as hyper as can be. But you know, they normally have all these outlets. They go to school, they interact with their friends, they interact with all these kind of things that they do. Now that they don't have, they are stuck at home, and they're stuck in a home that they're not used to being in necessarily. And so that can be really hard for them, you know, as it would be for anybody. I mean, if you consider all of a sudden being stuck inside somebody else's home, that's a hard thing to deal with sometimes, and that's hard. But one of the other things that it's kind of affected as far as foster homes is just trying to navigate all the needs of the kids, such as medical needs or visits or anything, while also keeping them safe and your family safe, because you know nobody wants to get sick, nobody wants to be exposed, nobody wants to go through these risks and stuff. But we also have commitments to the not only the kids, we have to care for them still, um, of all needs, but we also have commitments to their families and to everything else, where we have to kind of link the bonds without making it too difficult for anybody. So there's still going to have to be some sort of visit, whether that's virtual or otherwise, you know, depending on what we can do. And then there also has to be, you know, doctor visits and care, and sometimes that's going to look really different than what it normally would. And if you're already going through many different visits, that could be kind of a challenge to try to navigate how we now need to do that because of the pandemic. As far as what I know from the need for foster parents and stuff, I think in what I've seen in the past, you know, in my own thoughts, is that there's going to be a big need because a lot of the kids are reported and called in by third parties. They're called in by teachers, they're called in by mentors and peers and other kind of things. And these people aren't around right now, you know, and so when the world kind of goes back to normal, all these mentors are going to be back around, and there's probably going to be a high need. I mean, we see these patterns all the time when school starts and stops and stuff, and that's definitely something to consider, is that there's probably going to be some sort of need in the future for more families, at least for some time. As far as them coming in right now, I don't really know. You know, I don't know that kind of stuff. I don't know if there's statistics or not, but.
And I just wanted to say in closing that those who are on the fence, you know, wondering if they want to go through the whole licensing process, I would suggest to at least do the trainings. Like we were saying, there's no pressure. Even if you only went to one session and didn't want to do it anymore, there's no big deal about that. And also specific to LGBTQ, specifically, I mean, don't let any self-doubt or judgment or anything like that. Don't let that be a factor in your decision to foster care, because it's seriously not an issue in the community or with anyone else. If anyone did have a personal issue, that's their problem, no one else's. But don't let any of that, you know, play a factor in you getting licensed to be a foster parent.
Brad, thank you so much. That was so well said. Yes, please don't let it stop you, because we need you and we appreciate everything that you bring to this. You bring to this things that other families might not be able to, and you have a place here and are needed. So, and Kylie, I agree. I think we're going to see a trend of kids coming into care when all this is done. And so we're just hoping to get as many foster parents licensed during this time as we can and make it as easy as possible for you during this time. It looks a little different, and that's okay. So thank you, everyone. And especially thank you to Brad and Gary for coming and joining us, for your insight that you had, and Kylie for coming and giving us your time this evening, and both families articulating so well the answers to the questions that came in. We really appreciate it. We have an ongoing need for good homes for kids in the state of Utah, and we appreciate your interest in doing that. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Amy, for co-hosting with me, and all my other coworkers for jumping in and making sure I was seeing all the questions, and through text and other ways to keep me on track tonight. I really appreciate that. So we hope you have a great evening, and please go fill out that form and let us know if you would like more answers to your questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great evening.
Bye.